Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And we have going on right now the third in the series of installments on how to critique the critique. And this specific critique episode is dealing with the reviews from Dr. Capo Chichi and his analysis on Jean-Claude Mboli's work from 2010 titled The Origin of African Languages. So we're going to continue this series and we have a lot to discuss. So all that and more when we return in just a moment. And we are back, and I am going to switch from this mode and go to the full screen so that y'all can see the presentation. And so, as I stated before, this is the How to Critique the Critique series, and we uh, try to help the layperson to understand the different layers of how scholars critique works. And so um, we want you to be prepared that, when you are reviewing a body of work and you find some commentary that is critiquing the work, uh, you need to be able to critique the critique and or even look for critiques of the critique so that you can have a more well-rounded uh, perspective on the particular subject that is being discussed in these scholastic works. So, as you should know by now, we are reviewing some commentary made by Dr. Sandro Capocici out of Benin, I believe. And he is a linguist and is working on a second doctorate in African art history. And uh, our good brother, Jonathan Owens, better known as Smash Rockwell, has been engaged in conversations and debates with myself and others of my camp, if you can say, regarding the place name Kemet. And so because I cite Jean-Claude Mboli, and he has some particular points of views in regards to various different subjects. uh, Jonathan Owens has been critical of Jean-Claude Mboli, but Jonathan isn't schooled in language and linguistics, and so he doesn't really grasp the nature of the debates or the commentary coming from Jean-Claude Mboli. So as a result of that, he reached out to uh, Sandro Capocici, and he received some feedback from Capocici in the form of a 19-page PDF, you know, making comments about Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 work. And so this particular document was not made public. However, he, and I'm speaking of my brother Owens, has on occasion on a number of his shows since the document was given to him via email, has shown parts of the document. So what I've done is screenshotted uh, the certain segments of the documentation that has been shown publicly. And, this series is a response to those particular critiques. And, I'm very familiar with Dr. Capo Chichi, and so is Jean-Claude Mboli. And just for the record, that these conversations that we are having here uh, are do not involve Jean-Claude Mboli himself. And so these are just my analyses of what's going on. And so uh, Sandro Capocicci, has been guilty in the past of misconstruing arguments, and he has also shown that he doesn't really fully grasp the concept of historical comparative linguistics. And that is not to say that he is not knowledgeable about linguistics. Again, he has a PhD in linguistics. So, but his linguistics is of a different type, and it's not in historical comparative linguistics. And so, because of that, some of his commentary is off, and a number of his commentary is right on point when it comes to certain arguments made by Jean-Claude Mboli. And just because I am in conversation with Jean-Claude Mboli and I have cited his work, that does not mean that I agree with everything that he has written, and that that I believe that he has not made any mistakes. And so, if you read my works, and or if you have, listened to any of my commentary regarding any of this, you know that to be a fact in terms of my own critiques of certain things. But as always, again, certain arguments are not warranted, or have been proven to be just fallacious. And as I stated before, some of the arguments, for example, made by Dr. Capo Chichi, have in fact been legitimate arguments against hypotheses made by Jean-Claude Mboli. So we will continue on. And so this particular commentary here is, I guess, is highlighted in the blue. And so we're going to start off the conversation more specifically about the entry in Jean-Claude Mboli's comparative work when he's dealing with the concept of the sea. And so there's a word that Egyptologists pronounce as yam, that means sea in the ancient Egyptian language. And Jean-Claude Mboli has included that in his particular work. Um, but I guess the consensus is that the word is a borrowing into the ancient Egyptian language and from the Semitic languages. So let's just read the commentary from Capo Chichi. So he states in the document, um, a type of words we want to avoid. I guess the type of words we want to avoid when reconstructing words from an ancestral languages is words of foreign origin. The goal of reconstruction is to figure out how the earlier stage of a language was without the modern influences. Words of foreign origin reflect some of these influences. Often words of foreign origin can be detected thanks to their features that make them different from the native vocabulary. Sometimes it can be implied by the fact that the foreign words occurs late in the language's literature and is written in a way specific to foreign words. For example, in English literature, foreign words are typically written in italic. There is a comparable situation in ancient Egyptian, especially from the New Kingdom onwards. Foreign words in Egyptian texts, which were mostly of Semitic origin, were written in a specific way. This was called group writing by Egyptologists, and he is correct on that. Mboli compares Middle Egyptian Yem C, and normally in the uh, ancient Egyptian or the Egyptological literature, when you see, and we'll show a picture later of the actual hieroglyphs, when you see the two reed glyphs, they interpret it to mean a Y sound instead of two eyes. But Mboli chooses to write it as it is seen, as two eyes. And if you are like me, who use the German transliteration system, we put a J there to represent the semi vowels, um, Y or I, right? And so that's why I spell like that. So even though I'm saying yam, um, that's how Mboli writes it. And so let me start from the beginning again. And Mboli compares Middle Egyptian Yam C to Sango, which is a African language in Central Africa, Hingo, salt, and Zande Ime, water. He implies that they have evolved from the same ancestral word. However, Yam C only appears in the New Kingdom in Egyptian texts. There it is mostly written in group writing. This is a transcription method mostly used by the Egyptian scribes to record foreign words. Moreover, parallels to Yam are attested in Semitic languages, for example, Arabic, Yam, or Yam, however you pronounce the two M's together. C in Hebrew, Yam with a long A. And it continues, uh, and we're reading from right here, the third, I guess, paragraph. This is thus legitimate to consider Yam C as a loan word from Semitic into Egyptian. The word is thus unsuitable for comparison between Egyptian, other African languages, and the reconstruction of their common ancestor. So essentially, uh, Capo Chichi is stating that, in a reconstruction process, which is the central goal of historical comparative linguists, we want to eliminate, noise in the data. And so if we're trying to figure out the words and the phonology and the grammar and the morphemes of the parent language that is is native to it, we have to exclude, words that may in fact be chance lookalikes in terms of the comparative set, um, and loan words from, non-related languages or even related languages, because you can have interdialectical loan words, and or you can have languages that are genetically related. However, uh, the words originate in that branch of the family versus the language for which or the languages for which you are comparing. So you want to avoid as much as possible, and it's almost impossible to avoid certain loan words, because we just don't have, especially in the African context, written records in dictionaries going back so far in human history. So, but for the when it comes to this word yam si, it is written in such a way that it suggests that this is actually a foreign word in the Egyptian language, which we're going to deal with in just a sec. So again, this is our good brother Jean-Claude Mboli, and to the left is the text, Origin of African Languages, written in French. And as always, when we're doing any types of critique, and this is, the rule that I go by, we always cite the author directly. So in the text, we can see one of his, and this is Jean-Claude Mboli's comparative tables, where he has the word yam written in the second row here, the first column, and that word mer means see in French, mais, and I guess you would pronounce it, meaning see, right? And so he compares this to Shango, Hingo, meaning salt, and then this word ime in the Zande language meaning sea. So uh, he doesn't have a Hausa or a Somali variant of this word, or this doesn't seem to have survived in Coptic, at least, right? And so, this particular data set, he's comparing the first I in the Middle Egyptian forms to forms in Coptic, Sango, Zande, Hausa, and Somali, and trying to see what the pattern is. So in the Sango language, the pattern appears to be that the I corresponds to S or H, and in the Zande language, it corresponds to the Y or I in the first consonant position, right? And so what he's saying, Capo Chichi, is that this shouldn't even be in the data set because this is a loan word. And not only that, that this is really kind of attested in a new kingdom. And so for him to have this loan word that's attested in a new kingdom in a Middle Egyptian column, this is problematic, right? Now, what I would add to this conversation is the fact that this particular word is written with two I's. And in this data set, he only has two words that that have the two I's in the front. So he has one with one eye, and then one with one eye here, and then these two here. So it is my personal opinion that he should have done a total of 6 correspondences, and he should have had 2 forms with the single eye in the front, and then 3 forms with the single eye in the front, and then another 3 forms with the double eye in the front. And then that way he meets the threshold of 3 forms, 3 minimal forms for comparison, so that we can showcase the pattern. And so even though we don't have time in this particular video, Capo Chichi also has an issue with this first one here because he can't find the word canal in this form. Um, and so it is actually found in Budge, but he believes that this form is a misrecording of a form that is really Eru for canal. So we'll address that in another video. So for this data set, Capo Chichi has 2 entries that he's challenging, but we're only dealing with the one on the second row here, which is C. So we have to go into the text in a source material from which Jean-Claude Mboli, drew his data from. And so we go into Sir Alan Gardner's text on Middle Egyptian. And in this particular section, starting on page 556, he's talking about the double reed leaf. So this is what I meant earlier by the double reed leaf sign. So there's an individual reed leaf and there's a double reed leaf. So when it's 2 reed leaves, they usually, the Egyptologists, pronounce it as Y. And that justification, in my personal opinion, has never been brought forth. But that's a conversation for a different time, but we'll address why that is the case. And so, but Alan Gardner states that Y, the double reed leaf, in grammatical endings representing the Old Egyptian E or a double E. So that's why we can write it with two I's, because each reed leaf represents a I, or technically a Y sound, right? As initial consonant, hardly. Okay, so let me start over. Y in grammatical endings representing I or double I, and then it's a semicolon as initial consonant hardly, except in group writing where equivalent of Hebrew, this ayin here, right? And then semicolon again, use of double reed leaf and the double dash distinguish. So these are sometimes, I guess, not interchangeable all the time. So these are two different hieroglyphs here, right? So I screenshot and cut a different page where he actually has the entry here for Yem, which is right here, for C. And so he, of course, he automatically links it to Hebrew C, and so this is how it's written. And so in this particular form, it's not written in group form. And this particular entry is actually in Middle Egyptian. And so it is a rare form, right? And so we're going to continue down to another page. And so there's a section where it talks about new paragraphs and other additions. So we're just going to go to section number 62A, where he says avoidance of the repetition of like hieroglyph signs. Analogous to the phenomenon illustrated in the early part of section 62 are cases where what is avoided is repetition of signs other than a single consonant or even an entire word. For example, Yim C. And it says here, this is the oldest writing of this Semitic loan word. And so he states here it's a loan word. The triple water sign here serves partly as group writing for M, but partly also as the determinative for water. And so this is what he states here. And this actually may not be the case. Again, this is an early writing. Gardner wrote in the middle of the 20th century, in the early part of the 20th century. And so, again, because they're so Semitic centric, they don't look into African languages so that they can get a better understanding of exactly how the words are formed, right? So it's automatically, because there's other forms of this word which is clearly group writing. But what they don't tell you is that group writing doesn't necessarily mean it's a loan word, right? They have natural group writing for native Egyptian words, right? So, when you're making that critique, that is something that always has to be stated. So how do we distinguish if something is a native word versus a foreign word? That's just, group writing is one way, but it's not an ironclad guaranteed way to identify a loan word in the Egyptian writing, right? So again, as always, when we're doing critiques, we always want to cite directly the source material. And so on page 286, Mboli has a footnote number 16, and he states the following, which is on the screen in French. And so I have roughly translated for you in English. And so this is what he says. So regarding that word yam, meaning sea, Mboli says, the Hamido Semitis, the people who are Afro-Asiatic scholars, especially Mr. Cohen in the lead, They base themselves on the fact that this word seems attested in Hebrew to decree that it is a word of Semitic origin. But we know that this word has no etymology either in Hebrew, which is a language attested long after the Middle Egyptian, or in any other Semitic language. So Mboli is making you aware that of the controversy. So he's aware that the scholars believe that this is a loan word into ancient Egyptian, but the but he's challenging that notion, right? And he's also making the statement that if you try to do the etymological work of this word yam see in Semitic, you can't do it because again we're dealing with historical comparative linguistics, and we have this rigorous process, a way to eliminate loan words, because especially when you're dealing with African languages, you're dealing with languages that were primarily oral. We have a check and balance in the process of the comparative method, and that is to make sure that the words that we are comparing actually has an etymology in the language itself, right? Like all the like when we do the analysis, between the languages, that it makes sense from the language standpoint, because the the word forming processes should be the same for words that are for languages that are closely related, right? So how you would build a word in language A should be the same as how you build a word in language B. And if you have a particular form in language A, and we find that same form in language B, and we can make sense of the word only using language B, and they match the same as what we find in language A, then we know that this is stronger proof that the two forms are in fact cognate, because they have both. And of course, this is speaking specifically with words that can be broken down, as we say, analyzed, right? And I discussed this in the Illusion Volume 2 in great detail, and I give citations and examples of that particular process, right? So this is the conversation that Jean-Claude Mboli is having, and so um, the notes here, that note 16 that we just read, right, is in regards to this series of correspondences. So what Jean-Claude Mboli is talking about in this particular part of the book is we're dealing with grammatical morphemes. And so, as I stated before, in when we're breaking down, words and languages, morphology is very important. And so there's a feature in the Negro Egyptian languages, or China Intu as I call them, where the word for water has been grammaticalized, and words and concepts that belong in the class of liquids or uncountable things are affixed. That means there's either a prefix, a suffix, and rarely an infix of the grammatical morpheme or the word that historically means water, right? So he's showing that on this, what you see on the screen here. So in Middle Egyptian, there are these two words, nu, and in there's another form with newt, as we would say, and then mu. They both mean water, right? And there is a dialectical interchange. And so I'm putting this on the screen here. This is a table from my upcoming book where I'm showing that this word new, or you can say nu, meaning water, right here at the top, is the dialectical variant of this word mu, water. So when you see these three symbols here, normally Egyptologists translate this simply as mu or W. It should be more like Mawa, Mewe, Maui, Mayi, right? And we'll see why in just a moment, right? And so these independent words have been grammaticalized in the language, and it is suffixed primarily to roots. And we see this in Coptic, and we see this, for example, in the Zande language, right? So that's what he has here. And what I've done is, of course, I translated that what we just saw into English. So again, Middle Egyptian nu, newt, and mu, water. And so this is where he puts the yamu, meaning sea, and then he has this other correspondence here, and I have this written in, excuse me, highlighted in yellow for a reason. But before we get to that, so he's showing that that, for example, what he's arguing is that the word for sea is actually can be broken down to a concept of uh, uh, a body of water that is agitated, that has a lot of waves in it. And so, for example, he gives this word here, to disturb, to shake, chenin, because there's a word chen, hinu, meaning water, and I deal with that because that's important to the Kemet conversation. But but so this word meaning to disturb, to shake. And so I guess in his mind, this underlying H, corresponds to the double I or Y here. And he shows this word here, this H, nu, meaning waves, right? So we can see in the word Remi, meaning to cry, in the word, coming from the word Irit, meaning I. And there's another form, Ir, meaning to see, or Iri, meaning to see. Um, and then we see this word here, nu, heavenly water. And then, of course, coming from the word newt, and nu meaning water. But this newt, the sky goddess. So this, we're saying nu, but that second nu is actually a suffix. It's a morpheme. And in the text, as we can see right here, this Wejinu, he is corresponding to this word were, meaning lake. And I don't know why he did that. I will have to ask him, but I believe this is an error, because this word Wejinu, um, this is a legit term. It means torrent or flood. He is Jean-Claude Mboli is correct when he talks about this new being a suffix, but it does not come. I don't know if he believes that the W in this word comes from the W in this word lake and canal, but this is a totally separate word. It has nothing to do with this over here. So I made a correction to Jean-Claude Mboli's work. So you see here, just because he puts it there doesn't mean I agree. Um, because and this is a fundamental issue that I have with Jean-Claude Mboli's work, is that when you take a careful look at the ancient Egyptian words, the it is monosyllabic. And this is one of the examples that I use. So you have this word here, jet, meaning flood. This T is a suffix. Then you have that same root that I have highlighted in blue with the prefix W, meaning a body of water. So it is from this jet or jet, and then they drop the suffix and add a prefix, widget, meaning a body of water, that the new morpheme for water or liquids is added, and you get Wajinu. So you can see the process here, and this is clear as day. That word Lake Canal, that does not that's not accurate. And so the same thing here with this chenu, to disturb, to shake. And so if he's making that same, these aren't the same, right? So, but you can see it in the Zande language, is where cheme, meaning water, hume, meaning tears, right? Hirimo, urine, from the word combination hiri, meaning excrement, right? And then you have the liquid M, and then ngime, smoke, and ngume, sand. Now I know you're figuring like, okay, why is the uh, the liquid grammatical suffix added to a word meaning smoke? Because in, especially in Central Africa, in English, when we say, like somebody smokes cigarettes, we it is in the Congo, they don't smoke cigarettes, they drink cigarettes. And so because the smoke is fluid, like it is an uncountable thing, they put it in the liquid category. And it's the same thing with the word for sand. So sand is uncountable, right? It's just a mass body, without form, essentially. And so they put it all in the liquid class, even though, in for English speakers, we don't think of smoke and we don't think of sand, in the context of belonging to the category of water. um, but in Central Africa, that is very much the case, and it's proven by the grammar, right? So uh, so we will continue. So in a different conversation, so I know why he puts this chenin, to disturb, to shake there, because in another entry he has a form cheninu, or hin, and then nu, with the, which is the water grammatical suffix, talking about agitation, and and the shake. And then this word he compares to Sango language, yenge, which essentially has the same meaning. So this is what it says in English in terms of the commentary at the bottom of this particular comparison. He says the Middle Egyptian word provides the etymology of the word yam, meaning sea. The sea is defined above all by the incessant waves that animate it. It is therefore a term that can designate any turbulent river, as confirmed by the name of a river in Zande country, Singo, to be compared in the formal terms with Sango, Hingo, salt. So for Mboli, in his comparisons, words for like a big body of water, like an ocean or something to that nature, is also equivalent to the word for salt, because people, have gotten the salt from the ocean. So it's the place where the salt is at, right? And so just over time, the same word that is used for salt is the same word that is used for uh, ocean, sea, or something to that nature, right? So we should also remember that Yam corresponds to Zande Hime, sea, and Nzakara Hame, salt, right? And so this is based on some comparison. So what's important about this particular part here is the part of the conversation that is not discussed by Capo, Chichi, and Jonathan Owens, because Jonathan Owens hasn't read the text. And that is what Jean-Claude Mboli is attempting right here, is to provide the proper etymology for the word yam. Because again, when you try to go into Semitic and give an etymology for the word, it has no etymology, right? And so what he's saying again is that, so when you say a sea, what is a sea? We take for granted that we understand what we mean by sea. Like, like what's the difference between a sea, an ocean, a lake, a pond, and a river, right? So, the early African speakers, they had a particular process and a particular worldview where they were able to make a particular distinction. And so what he's saying is that the way that they made the distinction, between a sea and the like, is because of the incessant waves that animated it. So, anybody, if you've been to a big lake, like if you've been in the Great Lakes in North America, uh, or any kind of lakes in Africa, because it's a big wide body of water, you have large waves, roaring waves that animate the place, versus like a small lake where it's roughly still water, or a pond or something to that nature, right? So he's in addition, he's saying it's not limited to the size of the water per se. It's more so to deal with the function, the characteristics, the behavior of the water in the space. So the same word can also be used for rivers, uh, to designate any turbulent river, right? So so this is what he's saying here. And so the question is, does his argument have merit? And the short answer is yes, but I do not believe Jean-Claude Mboli went far enough on this particular point. And so this is what we're going to do. So from this point on, we're going to be dealing with my analysis, my critique of the critique, and we'll just go from there. So we're going to deal with the concept first of sea in Semitic. And so again, the Egyptologists believe that it is a borrowing. The word yam is a borrowing from Semitic, and these various languages like Ugaritic yam, Hebrew yam, Phoenician yam, Achaemenid Aramaic yam, Syriac yama, Macalan yam, Urmi, Ujima, Aramaic yama C, and these are primarily uh, Western Semitic words for sea, right? When you go and when you just do a simple search, I think these are just from Wikipedia, for the term here. And then, of course, when you go into a comprehensive etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language by Ernest Klein, he gives this, and this is how you write it in the Hebrew script, and that I have bolded in the red here. And so it's defined as sea, lake. So it can be a sea or a lake, a large basin, a reservoir, right? So, the question is, if it's borrowed from Semitic, why do they only refer to it as one definition? So, it could be a reservoir, it could be a lake, or just simply a large basin, and not necessarily a sea or an ocean, right? And so that's something to keep in mind. And so while they always go to Semitic, it is rare that they go into the Chadic languages. And so when we go to the TOB, and that is the Tower of Babel online database, uh, it provides in the Central Chadic these particular forms, right? So it is simply a word for water. So yim, yema, yimi, 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 emi, yemi, yemi, and yeme, I should say, yamu, yamu, all these different variations. Yamu, yim, 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 all these different variations of a words just meaning water. Now it's interesting that the TOB in their notes section says probably a Semitic loan. But I challenge that for the simple fact that if it is a loan word in Semitic, then it should have the definitions of sea. But none of these words are defined per se as sea. This is just a general word for water. And when we look at some other African languages, we're going to see that, the foundation of the word itself is simply water, right? And not sea. And so we are now going to continue along that path in the China into or Negro Egyptian languages. Excuse me. So before we get started, I want to deal with uh, before we start dealing with the whole yam thing. I want to bring up a fact that Jean-Claude Mboli brought up and highlighted in his text is that so we saw one variation of correspondences uh, to a different set of phonemes in the related languages. And so in this section on page 253, he is, and I created a table and translated it into English for you. These variations here, where the first I in Middle Egyptian corresponds to, for example, we're going to focus in this video on the Zande language again. So in Zande, for example, it is KKK, and we're focusing on Zande because his the only other word that he related in terms of the word for sea is Zande Hime, meaning and Ime. There's two dialectical variation pronunciations of that particular word. That in that text, excuse me, in his text, because he was primarily citing Zande in terms of that conversation dealing with Yam C. That's why we're going to focus on the Zande here. So, as you can see from the forms here, that in the Zande language, the E, Middle Egyptian E, corresponds to Zande K, and the voice velar, the G sound, G, right? So because he has three variations of each, it's a good and solid correspondence. And I have further verified this not only in Egyptian. So uh, what Mboli didn't realize is that these same correspondences happen internally in Egyptian as well. So he didn't do that in his text, and so I was able to verify this correspondence set. The relationship between these phonemes and the first consonant position that are highlighted in the red internally within Egyptian itself. And so, and then in addition to that, in of course my favorite languages, especially in Chiluba Bantu, so it corresponds the same way, right? So this is very important to know for our sound correspondences. So Middle Egyptian E is going to correspond to Zande K. And as we noted in the last video, Middle Egyptian R, as well as the nasalized of Vular both corresponds to Zande R in the second consonant position, as well as in, like in this form here, Iri to make, Zande Kana to make. So the R became nasalized, um, and so it became in R's and N's correspond internally within Zande. So this is sound. This is sound, right? So we have Irit eye, and then we have Ingeta vision, right? So and so this one's kind of funny, but I think again because it had to deal with face and eyebrows, it has evolved now simply to eyebrows in the Hausa language, right? So but so we're going to continue. So keep this in mind. So Middle Egyptian E corresponds with we write with the I sound, or the I, not glyph, but letter corresponds to both the voiceless velar K and the voiced velar G, right? And so there's another thing that we have to keep in mind in that process, and that is in the Zande language, oftentimes the second syllable, if it is a liquid, is often dropped. So I'm giving you this example here. In Zande, we had this word kua, meaning neighbor, companion, or fellow. And the source material from which I got it says this is an abbreviation of kura, another. That's one of his meanings, another, before pronouns of first and second person, singular and plural. The same text gives the full uh, definition in a later part of the text. On Zande grammar, kura, meaning neighbor, companion, and fellow. So we see in real time that there's two forms of this word in the current language, kua and kura. So the kua is simply the word kura with the R dropped. This is going to be important because this word kura corresponds to Middle Egyptian irit, fellow, iri, fellow companion, right? Because what did we just prove here? That the Middle Egyptian E, written with an I, corresponds to both Zande K and Zande G in the first consonant position. So when we come to this form of the word here, we have irit, fellow, companion. That's exactly what kura means: neighbor, companion, fellow. Right. So based on the sound correspondences here, this is a match. And so I state that given that kura, and this is to verify it further. So given that kura ends in A and Zande A equals Middle Egyptian T, this should be a sound correspondence. So it is confirmed on three accounts. One, the meaning; two, the sounds, and we always have to, when we're talking about cognates must stand on two legs. That is on form and meaning. So the forms match, the meanings match, and the morphology matches. And so what do we mean here? So remember from one of our previous videos that in ancient Egyptian, when ancient Egyptian has T as the suffix, it consistently corresponds to A as the last vowel in the language of Zande. So at one point in Proto Zande, it too had a so-called feminine T, and the words that were inherited from the proto language of Middle Egyptian and the proto language of Zande, over time, Middle Egyptian was able to keep the T, but the Zande language essentially dropped the T, and it became or I should say, it transformed into the final ah vowel, which we see consistently here, right? And then in a few forms, the ah was assimilated by the preceding, high front vowel e, ah, right? And so it became or e, right? So, but in these other forms, we see. So that's how we know that Ingera vision that we saw is cognate with this word irit, I, because of the correspondences between these two grammatical features, right? So keep this in mind, that in Zande, The K corresponds to Middle Egyptian E, I, which is they believe is a semi-vowel ya, right? And the R corresponds with R, and that the R is often dropped in the second consonant position, right? So that only leaves the first consonant with, trailing with two vowels. And so with that being said, thus, this is my first observation. So the Egyptian forms that are written with the double reed leaf, because the I in Egyptian, the Middle Egyptian, is written with the reed leaf. That I Y, or you can say J, is written with the reed leaf. So these are two reed leaves represented here. So again, the Egyptologists believe that this is a Y. A Y is uh, a single sound in the world languages. But this should actually be two different sounds. I mean, excuse me, the one sound that is repeated twice. And so I argue here, I'm making a hypothesis now, that this double I was once eared, or jir, how I usually write it, as evidenced by the following Egyptian entries. So again, let's go back here. So if I only seen this at first, and then I came about evidence of kura, I know that this form kua, you know, should have or originally had a form kura with an R in it. And so if I was to see a form kua kua, that kua kua should have been kura kura. And this is what is exactly, we're hypothesizing here, that this E should have been and this is a reduplication and not a Y sound. This is or yere yere, however you want to pronounce it, right? So let's look internally into the Egyptian language. So this is the process in which we have to do. So there's form. Let's go in the top row. This word here, ewer, meaning to conceive, to become pregnant, right? And in this particular form that we find in the Vigus dictionary is only written with two uh, leaves, two reed leaves. So it should really just be, if we was to write it as it is written, transcribe it as it is written, it should just simply be I, to conceive, become pregnant, which we would correspond to yiri, to engender, to bear, right? We have this form in the second row. Yayit, knife, sword, which compares to iri, meaning knife. But notice that there's another form in the language that survived as ker. So this yiri, we know for a fact that it corresponds, for example, to K's and G's, as we see in these forms. And I'll show a little later this internally, right? So this KR is just as I stated before. It's like saying kura kura. So this EE here should be kura kura. If, we want to say it like that, or kuri kuri. And so we have this form, and then we have this form here. And then we have this third form, right? So we have this form here, yayit, mishap, harm. Yayit, evil, disaster, mishap, trouble, harm, a wrongdoing, which is done. And we have this form here that is partially reduplicated. And so at this time, instead of the R's being dropped, one of the J's in this form or I's in this form is dropped. And so the R's are reduplicated. And so, and sometimes you'll see it suffixed with a T, meaning an adversary. And in this form is and so we know that this is reduplicated because when we look at this form, when we talk about distress, Yerit to Tawa, right? So this is um, and so that same T in adversary and distress is even in the word for mishap, harm here, right? So this was all within the same semantic field. Yi for fish, irich, a fish, yi saying, a maxim, iri to recite, to say, yit, the word meaning father, and sometimes you will see it written as yit. I mean yit tif because of the F here. Iri to do, to make, to create, to act as, to engender, to bear. So it's from the same word that you see up here. And then Iru, creator, creation and form. And that word Iru, meaning ancestors, forebearers. And so it's from this kind of, so we even have the definition in this word here: father, grandfather, ancestor, your forebearer. That's what this word means. And so, so that's, I put it over here, is not to elongate the table, right? So this is the same words. So as you can see, the double I's correspond to the single I or J R in, interdialectically, or this could be a different language altogether, right? So the what we grab from this is that the Egyptian forms in double I should correspond to reduplicated forms, for example, in Zande, KR, KR. And that's exactly what we see here. This Yit knife, sword, Iri knife corresponds to KR, KR knife within Egyptian itself, right? And so if we're comparing this with Zande, if our hypothesis is true, then this would how should I say, this would nullify the argument made by Sir Alan Gardner and James P. Allen that this in fact is a Y sound. It is the I reduplicated, and it is a short form of words that were, IR, and before that KR, right? So we're going to do this in 3 steps. So in the first one here, um, we have, of course, on the left is ancient Egyptian, and then in the middle we have Zande with the sound correspondences in the right column. So we have Yi to come, to return, to occur. Then we have in Zande Kara, return, Karaga, to turn back, right? And so it's not reduplicated, at least in the dictionaries that I have for that word. But we know that that corresponds to sound. So when we have ye, meaning O, it corresponds to ki, O, in Zande. And also ye, of surprise and displeasure. Ah. So it'd be somebody saying ki in ancient Egyptian. Ki or ye, right? Let's go to the third row. Ye to send. Now is coming together here. So we have the form kedai, which is keda kedi, to send, and then a second form kedi kedi, meaning sent. You see in Zande that these words are reduplicated. So it's this same reduplication process that is reduced in here. So the Egyptian is missing the second consonant in each one of these words. So it's not yeah. It's not simply yeah. It's the ancestral form is closer to Zande. keti keti. And we are reaffirmed of this in the last row. Yit, mishap, harm. Yit, yayit, if you want to say it like that, evil, disaster, mishap, trouble, harm, a wrong, which is done, has been done, right? So we have in Zande language, kere, bad, fierce, terrible, severe, dangerous, serious, poisonous. Kere boro, bad, evil person, boro meaning man or person. And then we have karu karu, rude in speech, cheeky and pundit. Kara, enemy, stranger. Karetu, disobedient, stubbornness. So we see even here it is reduplicated in one of the forms. So it's talking about somebody with bad character, right? So, this is not the only correspondence that the Middle Egyptian E sound corresponds to in Zande in terms of K. So we dealt with G earlier, and so now we're going to deal with the Y. So we have the same form here. Yeye, to come, to arrive, return, corresponds to Yande, Zande, ye, to come, or Yi, I, come. Yeye, and Chikan, to pass, Yeye, he, to move, to go somewhere. And then it corresponds to Zande Yera, run, go fast. And I want to highlight here that when you see forms like Indu, to go, and Ora, to run, that there's a correspondence internally between Zande R and D. So when we go back here, when we see this form Keda, Keda, Kedi, 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 this is I wouldn't say allophonic, but it is of the same. There's something going on that makes the R become a D sound in Zande for certain words, for certain forms. So we're treating the D and we're treating the R as allophones, and we'll see like in this form here, Indu, to go, Ora, to run. So this is just to show you the correspondence, and we see the same thing in this third row. Like if we go to the bottom here, Re, she, her becomes De, woman, right? So there was probably a morpheme that was lost that created a particular type of environment that turned the R into D, right? So even this yeye, agree, approve, consent, can be I, yes, or ida, to agree. So this ida is the form here, iri, to affirm, right? And remember that iri is the original form of the what has been reduced simply to I or E that has been reduplicated. So every time you see these two I sounds, this is a reduplication of the same sound. It is a short form, or it's two things. It's a short form and a reduplication of the short form of the word. Right. So we go here to yit, knife, sword, yera, e, yera, yere, cut, slice, circumcise, yerati, yeratise, circumcision, yere, yere, the cut, slice, circumcise. So because the T suffix that you see here, here's the hieroglyph for it, this nominalizes the verb. So this was a verb. And when we nominalized the verb had to deal with cutting. The it turned it into an instrument suffix, the T instrument suffix. So now it's a knife, sword. But the Zande language kept the original concept of to slice, to circumcise, and then when it's repeated, cut, slice, circumcised, right? And so we have this form here, ihi, meaning hey. It's a call of rowing, a shout of a funeral. And I put here it should be double I dotted H. And is there So I think I gave yes, because so for your following, go to the second row. Hopefully you can see my mouse. So you see how this form is the double I H, and it's the interjection hey, and it's a kind of a shout or something that you make. So it's double I H. So when you go here to this bottom one and it's written uh I dotted HI, this is a stylistic form. It should be double I H because it's the same thing. Hey, a call of rowing. And so it corresponds to Zande Yora O and Yora Yoro, to shout, let out a yell. So Yora Yora Yoro, that's what it is, right? So, and lastly, so in this one, the I corresponds to Zande K in the first consonant position. In this one, the I corresponds to both Y and I in the first consonant position. And what is missing, of course, is the R or D sound, as we just shown. And so now in this slide, I'm showing that the uh, I corresponds to Zande H and also Zande 0, right? And what I mean by 0, let's look at the first one. So in the first one, it says Yederit, meaning fields on foreign countries, corresponds to Zande Hara, field, and Ara, field. So the H is dropped. So it's kind of the reverse in this process. So in Egyptian, the first consonant is retained and the second consonant is dropped. Whereas in this example, in Zande, depending on what dialect you are referring to, the in terms of the consonant being dropped, it is the first consonant that is dropped, and the second consonant stays. And it happens again in the second example. So we have error, shine, sheen, and we can see here the reduplication again, except this time the first consonant is dropped, just like in the first consonant in Zande in both the second and first and second example. And so we see here, and this is a different variation of the same. So it has to shine to sheen. This verb. I'm sorry. This is a noun, and then we have this variant form here. Dotted H nasalized vul trill, which is a type of R sound. Kheri, meaning one who shines. Therefore, the sun god. Khariyet, light. And so it corresponds to Zande Huru, sun, and then the H is dropped. It's Uru, sun. And we have, you know, Yeye, again, to come, to return, to occur, corresponds to Zande Hadia, Hadia, turn, change, to turn around. I don't know why that's in there twice. Well, turn, change, to turn around, right? And so that's what we mean by to return, to turn around, to go. And then we have this form here, Iwu, to be angry, and Zande Hera, Here, get angry, to get angry, to be angry, to be an alcoholic. Hera, and then the tone switches on the second version, means wrath, anger, rage, irascibility, courage, right? And so this time it's not necessarily reduplicated, but that second I becomes W. And so the I and W in Middle Egyptian also interchanges. So this is the second word. So the R is still dropped in this form. And so this is important because this helps to verify that the hime and ime, water, river, juice, that's what the word means in the Zande language, corresponds to yim or yeyim, sea, because the root is water. Once again, like when we go into the Chadic languages, it is simply a word for water. right? And so, and I have here as a note, like this H, dropping off is just like this word hemit and imit, meaning country, land, in and I think it also means district in the Collagen language. And this is the word that's cognate with the word Kemet. That's another conversation for another day. So we set up these sound correspondences, and we're going somewhere with this, right? So now let's get to the grammar of it all. And so the liquid. So in Middle Egyptian, uh, you see that the M for liquids is grammaticalized just like what we saw in other areas, but now we're going to kind of focus on it. So for example, we have this root sh in the ancient Egyptian language that means lake, pool, pond, garden, bassett. For liquids, it also means sea, and it corresponds to akan, su, water. And when it is prefixed with m, now it means pond, but it meant pond, but it's just a variant of the same word with the m for liquids class, prefixed. And then we go to the last one here. We have guess, the word meaning to overflow. And when we have it suffixed with the M classifier, it is now a word for stormy lake. So you're seeing it can be prefixed or suffixed. And we see it suffixed again at the bottom of your screen. We had this word where we it, flood, and then warim, flood. The M is a grammatical suffix, uh, which is the mu, regardless, meaning water. I believe several people have reconstructed it simply as ma. And so, in a kind of plural form, it's my way, mawa, right? My, like that, right? And so we see it so this is what we're saying that we're seeing here in the the word for yem, see. So technically, this should be two words, ye and mu, which is a suffix for water. And so remember these strict criteria that we have. It has to make sense in the language. You have to be able to prove the etymology within the language itself. It should have the same morphological process within the languages. And so in the Yoruba language, that word is omi, water. And then in Chiluba, it is mai, water. And this same word mai, there's a homonym that means ally and associate, and that corresponds to meri, meaning friend, in the ancient Egyptian language. And so that mai, water, corresponds to Middle Egyptian meru, canal, channel, lake, harbor. Also Middle Egyptian weret, canal in the funeral ritual, and also the weret, flood, werem, flood, that we saw earlier. And we're also going to see that the same word for flood is going to just be the general word for water itself as well. So note that in Egyptian, the M sound is in Mary and the W sound is in water. They interchange, and they correspond internally with each other. So if you see Mer canal and you see Weret canal, it is the same exact word, probably dialectical, right? And so the R sound becomes Y and becomes I. So this Mai, water, corresponds to R in Middle Egyptian. But this R comes from an S, a Z sound. And so it's a process in linguistics we call rhodization. And this is when certain types of sounds become rotarized. So this is a r, mer. But this Y comes from G. So there was a linguistic process of G, Z, R, Y. And we'll get into that a little later. And so that same mai, water, mer, where, etc., is the word that you find in Yemoja, in the name Yemoja, which is the mother Ye of water, of the waters. And so in Kiswahili, you would say Moji. And in other languages, it would be just, Moja, Gigi, Gia, and we'll get into that in just a moment. So that, you find this even in Semitic. So that word mai, is a word for water. So here it is in Akkadian, mu. Here it is in Ugaritic. Here it is in Hebrew. Here it is in Syrian, Aramaic, mai, Arabic, ma, with the glottal stop at the end, moi, mai, me, water and rain in Tigrinya, and Harari, me. So this exists. So, it could be argued that this mai, water, is the inverse of, did I pass them already? Probably did. Of these forms that you see here, right? Because the root, it is really this root that is suffixed by m for liquids and water and uncountable things, and we'll show that in just a second why that is true, right? And so we have these different forms, for example, in Proto-Bantu. So these are the reconstructed forms from the BLR3, the Bantu language or reconstruction version 3 online database. So we have Jiba, pool, pond, deep water, well. Then Jiba, water. And so that's where you get Moja and whatnot. But that Ba is also a variant of Mu, Ma, Ba, water. Ma, Ba, Ba. It's all the same. It's different variants we get to. So we see this variant Jiba, water, corresponds to Yoruba Ibu, deepest part of the water, and then Aka Ebunu, deepest part of water. And notice this form here, Jima, water, which we correspond with Sumerian Idim, spring, subterranean water. And then the liquid suffix is dropped and it is reduplicated, Jiji, water. And then Jiji, a derived form of that, simply meaning water, also meaning river and water hole. And so we see in Egyptian as well, Jemit, lake, also a holding pen, right? So we see these forms. So this is how I know that the TOB note is wrong when it's talking about probably borrowed from Semitic, because then you would have to argue that the Semites somehow met up with the Proto-Central Sudanic speakers and, essentially lent them the word for sea. Lent them the word for water. So remember that, the different forms in Chadic is not translated even in their own database to mean sea. So how did they borrow it and just change the meaning of it? And then the meaning fits the forms that we see expanding beyond Chad, even going into ancient Egyptian itself. It doesn't make sense. And so that those forms, yeah, these are all different variations of the same form, right? So these are the forms that I'm talking about from earlier. And so we see even like this form here in Proto-Bantu, Jiba. It's still pronounced Jiba, and this Jiba. right? Water, pool, pond. You find reflexes of this in Egyptian dealing with water and moisture. So we had this word jibet, thirst, jibu, purification booth, refuge, and there's a there's a homograph, a jibu, meaning refuge or place of refuge, jibet, and so they play along with that. So, but the purification part, is reaffirmed in this variant here, jibehahu, libationer, jib, ointment, salve. When you salve, that means you're slobbing from the mouth. Jibeh, moisten, jibeh, stream with liquid, be suffused with blood. Jabehu, sprinkle water. Jaber, draughtsman. Jabehi, a bodily liquid. Jabehs, wash. So all of these is clear as day that you can see that it has to deal with liquids, right? And so that ba is and there's a variant of that either too, is pa, has to deal with water, right? So this is from G.J. Campbell Dunn's Sumerian grammar, and he's comparing, for example, pa, canal in Sumerian, to Proto-Western Sudanic, ba, bot, swamp, sea, pot, swamp, Proto-Western Nigritic, bo, boom, be wet, in the Kele, botoku, mud. It's the bo prefix in the Lolo language, basi, and basi, water, and Kele, balia, water. The ba is the what is being grammaticalized, but they're basically two different words that mean the same thing that have been put together. One is used for grammatical purposes. The other one is the root of the word meaning water. So this si is what we find in Akan, su meaning water, right? And so we have in Mande, man, ban, muddy water, Mongbetu pa, depth of a stream. So you see all these different the semantic field is connected in all these different ways. And so they expand the language by combining words that essentially mean the same thing to and grammaticalize them in a way that new words are formed so they can expand the vocabulary list. And so that su that we talked about, here's variations of it: tua, water, and guang insu, water. In our female language, asua, water. And then bu is, bu ba is the prefix, da in Proto-Western Nigritic, rain, cloud, right? De, sky, cloud, two, all dealing with water, two, pool of water, right? And so, we got to keep these things in mind. So that's why we got to look at the longer scope of things before we start talking about loan words and the like, right? So keep that in mind. So the M prefix, just to kind of recap, the M word meaning water, M in mu or mawa is grammaticalized, and in Luba is still productive. So you say ma yi. Yi is the root. Ma is the prefix. It has been grammaticalized in Yoruba, so they just say omi. But that M is a grammaticalized prefix of liquids. I is the root. That's the yi in Chiluba. It would be the R in Egyptian. While in Egyptian, they still have the M prefix. And as we noted earlier, that M can be prefixed or suffixed to the root. Right? So now we continue. So now the E, an affix of liquids. I'm asking a question. So let's look at some examples here. So, and on the Egyptian, on the left-hand side is Egyptian, and I have this form, Yeyeteru, meaning rivers, streams, and you can see it's written with the double reed lift. This is a rare form, admittedly. Most forms of this word is written with one I, but this form is written with two I's. And so, this I'm showing this because it's possible we can make the argument that in the word yim, this is simply the same feature, for words meaning water. Because in Egyptian itself, you'll see this e prefix on words dealing with water. So iteru, river, water course, basin. So the I is now replaced with m in the word interu, meaning flood, deep waters. In the word irit, water. Idim, itim, a body of water. Isheru, crescent-shaped pond, pool, precinct of Mut, the god Mut. And Karnak, at Karnak. Ish, saliva. Remember that sh word means water. Emit, lake. Iwihe, moisten, water filled, plots. Inject, flood. Right? And so this I comes from G. And so the Mande languages keep the older form. So when you see, for example, in the Pela language, ya, water, Mapi, yi, water, in Mende even, ya, water, ye, water. And let's go back. And we go back to, for example, in Bantu, ma yi, water, omi, I, water, right? That yi in Proto-Bantu, Gigi, Gigi, those are the words. These originally came from G, as we see, for example, in Mande, Gi or G, water. So either G or D, G. And sometimes when the D is followed by this front vowel here, it is the palatalization process. That's why the Y is in front of it. So you pronounce it G. So that's how that G becomes Gigi, is reduplicated in Proto-Bantu. Gigi, water. Gigi, river, water hole. Right? So G or Gi or G, water. Guo, Jo, water. And that becomes palatalized and becomes Z, and Z becomes S. Suma, Jumo. This is a fuller form of the word that becomes yam, or how they pronounce it, yam, meaning water, rain, and whatnot. Is jma, juma, suma, rainy season in Mande. So you got to know about these sound changes and how the phonetic environment causes these different variations of the same word, even within the same language. Right? And so it's this G, meaning water, that was prefixed to words for water that we see here. And it's further confirmed by when in this form for teru, meaning, river and all that, they dropped the E and they replaced it with the other. So in this dialect, they don't use E, they use M. So interu, flood, deep waters. And so in this dialect, they chose to write it with the two, yi, waters, great waters, rivers, streams. So this is why, again, this is a long, painstaking process, but stuff starts coming together once you start looking at things systematically and taking the lead. And so to show you, for example, that the G becomes like G and S, for example, it's usually after E, it becomes Z. So like there's a Luganda language dictionary, Murphy 1970, it was published in 1972, that gives a few examples that I have here. So look at this word, singa. A variant of the word is sinze. So when that G is followed by e, which is we write with the E sound, the E letter, then in this particular environment, the G becomes Z. And so we see it again in Siga. It becomes Size, to become wretched, miserable, be stricken with disease, endure prolonged illness. Siga, Size, give over to sin. Isiga, Esize, dedicate oneself to the service of something. For example, the Kabaka, and I forgot what that kind of society is among the Baganda people. But you see how the environment changes. So we have two different variations of the same word in the same language. Singe, sinze. So it's the same here. Je, je. It's all palatalized because of the environment that it is in. And so normally E, I, U, sometimes A can palatalize the veilers. So that's how, the forms, for example, of K become Y in the Middle Egyptian. Because even in Zande, if a K is followed by I, it will palatalize and be pronounced Kya. And then over time the K is lost and it just becomes Ya, Yi, Ya, like what you see here. So it can happen with G or it can happen with uh, the voiceless velar variant K, right? So this is what it comes down to based upon our analysis to sum everything up. So we have this form, for example, yerit, meaning water, yerit, water, right? And so what I'm arguing here is that this form here, yerit, meaning water, was reduplicated, yeri, yeri. The T was dropped. And then, as we saw earlier, the R's are dropped. So we're just left with the double I or the double J. And then added to that was the suffix of liquids, just like what you see here. And this is what became the word sea. And it should have been sea, lake, and basin, and all of that other kind of stuff, which you found written in Middle Egyptian, but a rare form, just like this is a rare form of the word river, streams, yeyeteru, right? It's a rare form, but it's written in the same way, double reed leaf. I'm going back. I'm sorry. There I go. Right? So this is what I'm arguing. This isn't Mboli's argument. This is what I'm arguing. That Yerit became Yer, became Yeye plus M, and it became Yeye Mo, Yeye Ma, Yeye Mu, C. And so in Kikongo, they still have because remember the J or the I sound derives from a velar. So in Kikongo, this double J, this double I, is Nkoko, river. Second consonant is dropped, right? And it is this form that in the reconstructions for Proto-Bantu is GG, water, as you can see here, right? So is this GG water plus water, just becomes great water for C. But there's something more to this type of water. And so, I know Mboli argues that the cognate for the Middle Egyptian form of C is hime, which means water. And when you say bahime, it means sea, because ba means great in the Zande language. The real cognate for Jije or Jijamu or Yayamu, meaning sea, is Zande Ingirimo, flood, a large sheet of water, deep water, whirlpool, pool, deep pit. This makes more sense in terms, not only in terms of phonetics, in terms of meaning. So remember, and we would have to go all the way back to Hebrew, you because they just say sea, but it doesn't just mean sea. It means lake, large basin, or reservoir, right? Any big body, deep, waters, right? And so when we go back to this form here, oh, here we go. Nope, here we go. In Giri, because remember that the Middle Egyptian I or J, or the reed leaf, I should say, corresponds to Zande K and G, and R corresponds with R. And this M, O, is the suffix um, of liquids and uncountable nouns. So it makes sense. Ingiri mo, flood, a large sheet of water. Deep water, whirlpool, pool, deep pit. Angiromo, the I makes it plural, right? So how can we prove it? What does ingiri mean? So in Zande, that word ingiri comes from a word meaning knot of plants, coil, a billow, and wave. These are the nominal forms, right? And I argue that they are cognate with, for example, Sumerian ingiri, meaning foot, path, and a variant of that is Meri, and Ingur, cosmic underground waters. A variant of that is Ingura. In, in ancient Egyptian is Geret, meaning foot, leg, and then Ger, meaning to run away, to flee in terror, and Gur, meaning stream. So if you, uh, this is a point that Mboli has made in his 2010 work, and which I've been able to verify, and which this discussion indirectly, directly verifies the semantic path here, because a word meaning foot and leg ultimately ended up meaning rivers and water in general in Negro Egyptian. And so we see that even here, because this word get it with the T suffix for body parts, foot, leg. Now the action of the foot, leg, gerer, meaning to run away, to flee in terror, and ger, stream, right? And sango is get a foot. And remember that G is what became J in Proto-Bantu. Notice the same thing. Jij, to come. Jiji, water. Because it's not just water in terms of the substance water. It's the behavior of water. We're talking about free flowing, high moving, fast moving water, because it comes from the root meaning foot, the most ancestral form, and then comes from the concept of going to run. And so even in English today, if somebody left the faucet on, when you were young, your mama would come into the door and say, "Who left the faucet running? Who left the water running?" Because we're still using the ancestral language. We associate the movement, the fast movement of water, drinking water, because drinking water is fast moving water. You don't drink the water that is not moving, that is stiff. That's not drinkable water. So the drinking water was the running water. And then those concepts of running water, of running, becomes the words for streams, becomes the words for rivers, and then becomes a word for oceans and seas. And so this is how this ye jiji in Egyptian, to come, to occur, to return, chikan jijiha, jijihe, to move, to go somewhere becomes important. Because, as Mboli stated, his hypothesis is that the word for sea came about from the notion of uh, to disturb, to shake waves. It's water with a lot of commotion in it. It's not still water. It's not like when you go to see a pond and and the water is just kind of sitting there. Seas and rivers, especially active rivers, are fast paced and moving. There's rapids, nearby, especially like if you're near a waterfall. You see, uh, a lot of this commotion going on. It's shaking, and so the path that he went, it was a I wouldn't have went that particular path, but ultimately he's right on this issue here. So it's when you're saying Jiji Yam, you're talking about water that moves. That's why it becomes that this word for water can become the word for rivers and streams, as we saw in earlier in the Proto Bantu. Jiji water, Jiji river, water hole, like a basin, right? So this is the same form in Egyptian that doesn't have the M suffix, but this is reduplicated here, but it's not reduplicated here. Jemet, lake. It's a water hole, a basin, just like what we saw in the Hebrew, right? So when we go back to the Zande word ingiri for knot of plants, coil, billow, wave. What is a billow, right? Let's look up that term. So when you look it up, just put it in your Google search. It's the first thing that comes up. Definition of billow. In a noun form, it is a large undulating mass of something, typically like a cloud, smoke, or steam. Right? It's just a big group of something. That's why when you go back here, it says like a knot of plants, a coil, like a large coil of something. It's a large bundle of something, right? But in this particular case, when it comes to a billow, it says a large undulating mass of something. So we'll get to this word undulating in a minute. But in the verb form, for example, of fabric, to fill with air and swell outward. So this is why, like, for example, this form here, because this is of the same root in the verb form, except the G becomes Y in terms of yura, to flow outward, right? Because it's all about flowing, it's all about motion. And so to fill with air and to swell outward like a flood, like the inundation of a river, right? Like a tsunami coming and hitting the shores, right? So let's go to this word undulating. To undulate is to form or to move in waves, to fluctuate, to rise and fall in volume, pitch, or rhythm, to present a wavy appearance. So let's go back to his hypothesis here that the concept of sea, meaning to disturb, to shake, is talking about, he mentioned earlier about waves, the presence of these large waves. So when we go to Ngirimo, flood, a large sheet of water, deep water, whirlpool, pool, deep pit. You're talking about the big waters that rise, that that undulates, that rises and falls, that floods, that has large waves, that has a lot of activity, that is running, that is in motion, right? Let's go back. To present a wavy appearance, undulating, having a smoothly rising and falling form of outline. So even in the Egyptian language, you have a few terms. Weru, wave of the sea. Flood water. Newt, nuyit, or nuwayut, water. Flood, wave. Harenu, remember that new suffix right here. Waves. So specifically, saying like the rising of water, waves. Nuyut, wave, water. And so even in other forms of the word, so for example, that the myrrh and the word that we saw earlier that had to deal with flood and the like, they all come from words meaning to move, to go back and forth. And this is a comparison between the Egyptian and the Chiluba. And so, the sound correspondence is here, but I want to concentrate on this third row here. So min to move about, to shift, min to impregnate, maminyi begetter, samin to set in motion, to shift a boundary. Corresponds to chiluba buela, to enter, to penetrate, to introduce, to engage in, to undertake in, to indulge, to impregnate, to penetrate, to abound in, to invade, and to fill, to lie down for the sun. Right? And I highlighted this word to feel here, right? And let's look at these other forms here. So remember that M and W correspond and interchange in Egyptian. So we have winnie, to hurry, to pass by, to neglect. Win to move to and fro. Nim to move to and fro, to quiver. So this it's that same concept of undulating here. So to form or to move in waves, to fluctuate, to rise and fall in volume, to pitch or rhythm, to present in a wavy appearance. So when something is moving to and fro, this is the signature of the difference between like a calm pond and a roaring sea, because the waves are coming in and out. This is why the same word means like to feel the rising of the waters, right? And why the same words for water is also the same word for flood and wave in Egyptian, because it's talking about the flooding waters of the Nile River, right? And so lastly, I and I'm hypothesizing here, this form that you see in Egyptian, it is possible, and I have to do some more research on this, but I wanted to include this into the discussion. So let's look at, for example, this word wasech, to traverse. Traverse is just another way of saying to walk, to move, to go, to run, to bypass, whatever, right? And then we have a dialectical variant of that is wasesh, to pass fluid, to urinate. Waseshist, urine, emission, discharge, right? And in another word, we have this word mu, or mu, meaning water, bodily fluids, that we saw earlier. So this independent word here was also grammaticalized as a prefix and a suffix to two words. And so we see this form miwi, water, rain, semen, fluid, odima. So notice that this word mu is also has the double reed leaves, except the double reed leaves are second. So this isn't a reduplication of the full word. because now the three water signs, this last one is only used as a determinative, as a classifier. So it's just mu yi yi. And so mu wi wi, this is in reality the reverse of so-called yam, meaning sea and water. And so notice that this root here is the real root mu means water, bodily fluids. And of course, this water, rain, semen is a bodily fluid, any kind of fluid, and odema bodily fluids, right? And so when it's suffixed by T, it becomes the word for urine. And so I'm wondering if you can read this as so look at it in this way. So you have to traverse outward, right? And so it's talking about to pass fluid, to urinate. So this is movement away from the body, right? And so with urine, we have the water first, and it's possible. I'm not saying that it is. I'm gonna investigate and do my the necessary proofs if it can be proven. But this double reed leaf here should be the word for it, to return, to go, to come, to move. So it's the movement of water outward. That's what urination is. But in this form, yi yi, mu, see, remember it's the coming, the in, the coming to and forth of the water. That's the difference between, because urine doesn't come back in the body, but water at sea, you see the waves coming in, going back and forth at the edge. And so I'm seeing if you can, if there's a possible way to connect that. So that's just my working hypothesis for now. But you see the same form of the word. So this is the earliest form of the word for see, and then in some later forms in the New Kingdom, they're written with some extra glyphs that let us know that it is done in group writing. But as I stated before, group writing isn't only for foreign words. They do group writing for native Egyptian words, right? So we just may not be familiar with the full process and the rules that govern that. And so we got to keep our minds open and do further investigations when it comes to the group writing thing. But either way it goes, these are the same forms of the words as they are written, right? So something else is going on here. And so again, when we go to the word ngiramo, flood. So this is the actual word that we would correspond here with the word jjmc. It is just partially reduplicated or it is reduplicated in Egyptian, but is not reduplicated in the modern Zande form. But this is the word ngiri mo, flood, a large sheet of water, deep water, whirlpool, pool, deep pit. And so since the Zande are no longer near a sea per se, you, you know, unless you just consider the ocean in terms of the Atlantic Ocean that's nearby, right? But this is the form. So the fact that it exists in Zande, and there's other variations in other African languages, this informs us the that it is more than likely actually a a loan into Semitic, because it can be explained in Egyptian and using the same uh grammatical and word forming processes in Egyptian. It exists in the Zande language, which reaffirms the interpretation that we have in Egyptian. So here's the summary of my analysis. And so that the word EMC in Semitic is more than likely a borrowing from China into Negro Egyptian, specifically Egyptian. The word cannot be analyzed in the Semitic languages. There's no explanation for the particular concept of C, right? And there's no way that you can analyze or break down the word or make it make sense in the Semitic languages. it was, I argue then it was reborrowed in the Egyptian New Kingdom from the Semites, because this is the time that they were coming back in and settling. So while it was a rare form in Middle Egyptian and whatever dialect it was in, or whatever language that it was in, you know, that dialect, uh, and this is the same dialect that moved into the Middle East and gave the Proto Semites the word al or Allah. And I've already done a uh, a video on that, and so I'm probably going to have to do another one, kind of summarizing that and summarizing this and showing proof that it was a dialect where the K and G sounds became the j sound, um, and those folks moved into the Levant and gave the Proto-Semites a lot of these ancient Egyptian terms, and then when their descendants, trying to escape famine, moved into Egypt, they brought these earlier Egyptian words that are now being Semiticized into Egypt, and they became part of the lexicon, but they were being pronounced in a different way, enough that it was recognized that the Egyptians seen them as foreign words, and so they written it like that. So, fourthly, Jejim or Ingirimo sea is really defined as a body of water with a large rising and fluctuating tides or flood waters. This can apply to rivers as well, because remember, it's the going forth, it's the whirling waves, the rising and falling of the tides that characterizes this body of water. So any body of water that has that characteristic will be called quote unquote yam. And therefore, it is my belief that Mboli on this point is justified. However, we need to account for the why this form is so rare in Middle Kingdom text. And so we're going to have a different conversation about the hypothesis that both uh, and this is independent of each other, both Mboli and I have regarding the linguistic makeup of ancient Egypt. And I'll talk about what we agree on and what we disagree on, and the subtle nuances in our arguments. And so, with that said, that is the end of this discussion. So I do appreciate each and every one of you hanging in with us, and you know until the fourth installment of our series. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. And with that said, I'm out. Peace.